I'm Tandy Culpepper. In this episode of The Hollywood Beat, I talk with a veteran print journalist, an award-winning correspondent with the Christian Science Monitor. Here's my interview with Francine Kiefer. Hi there, Francine.
Hi, Tandy.
It has been quite a process getting to do this because you've been so busy of late. Let's tell everybody now what your current position is with the Monitor, because I know you're the big mucky muck editor, but exactly what is it going on?
Sure. Um, I came out to California and the Los Angeles area in 2019, and I'm normally the West Coast bureau chief as a reporter covering California and the West Coast. But last winter, they had a need at the Monitor for a national news editor temporarily. And so I agreed, they asked me, and I agreed to step in as the interim national news editor. And we're getting close to a year of being the acting national news editor. But a replacement is in the works, so this should be coming to an end by the end of the year, and I'll return to reporting.
I'm sure that will be a relief because of the time difference, among other things, since there's a 3-hour time difference between here and the East Coast. I want to start out by congratulating you on the Los Angeles Press Club. Is it Press Club or Association?
The LA Press Club.
Yes, you were selected as for recognition in news feature reporting.
Correct.
And a very timely topic, considering the politics of the moment here. Tell me about the topic of your story.
Right. This was for a first prize award last year in the category of news feature writing for a profile that I did on Planned Parenthood. It was in the wake of the historic decision to overturn Roe. And I could have, and I actually did, try to do a very human interest related piece on women coming to California from states where abortion was banned to have abortions here in California. It was so difficult to work out connecting with women who were seeking abortions from out of state because it's such a private thing, and they were having to do this under cover of darkness, more or less. And it was just taking so long to work something like that out that I decided to switch gears and do a profile like you would do a personal profile, but do it on the institution that is basically the face of abortion rights in the United States, which is Planned Parenthood. And to look at that organization as moving from 50 years of enjoying and having national right to abortion to suddenly having to be on the offensive and to try and recreate these rights, try and come up with a strategy to help women seeking abortion. And I thought it would be just good to look at Planned Parenthood as you would profile a person, its history, its strategy, what is it going to do now? And that's the piece that won the award.
Wow. Such a timely topic, and one that is at the fore of the soon to be, well, not all that soon, it's still a year, but it's coming at us very quickly, the 2024 election.
Right.
There has been conjecture that this will be at the top of issues that drive people to the polls on both sides of the argument. Do you agree with that?
So far, it has been, right? We've had several elections in which abortion has been a defining issue locally in states. Kansas, Ohio, and backers of abortion rights have won handily in elections related to that. Perhaps, trying to change the state constitution was the issue in Kansas, and
And
abortion
wasn't that
rights voters won on that
that
issue.
state Supreme Court justice in Michigan or Wisconsin, perhaps? She campaigned on the fact that she was pro-choice. I can't think of her name, but it is so fraught with passion on both sides that the legislature there, I remember reading, was going to impeach her before she ever had her first case. It's crazy. It's just become out of all control in terms of sanity.
Well, Planned Parenthood's strategy is kind of a three-pronged strategy. They're working to increase access, and that's happening in states like California, where there have been a change in laws that make it even easier for people from out of state to come to California. They're working through the courts, litigating on this issue, and then they're working at the ballot box. So that is their three-pronged strategy on how to reverse as much of this ruling as they can. And it's going to be a years-long, decades-long strategy. It's a long fight for which people say persistence is, they need to have just as much persistence as the pro-life groups have expressed over the decades in, working the courts, working the ballot box, changing attitudes and things. So they're in it for the long haul.
It will be interesting to see how this pans out in November 2024, I think. Now, we're doing this interview the second week of October. It is now Saturday, a week following the Saturday when Hamas launched a fusillade, barrage, whatever the word you want to use, of rockets into southern Israel, killing more than 1,000, probably 1,300 or so people, and taking more than 100 hostages. In retaliation, they don't want us to use that word, to go after Hamas, or Hamas, however it's pronounced. You have, as you told me when we did the pre-interview for this, the Monitor has bureaus all over the world. What have you been hearing from your correspondent in that part of the world about the stakes as they are now? And what I fear, and I've spoken with other people about this, is going to be a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions.
Well, from the Israeli side, we're hearing the shock, the absolute shock, and of the attacks itself, the brutality of them, the ISIS-like nature of them, of beheadings and shooting families, including babies on the kibbutzim and things like that. The shock of the brutality of it, and as well as the shock of the lack of intelligence of, where is the famed Israeli intelligence? Why couldn't they?
And even so, and even as well, American intelligence.
Yeah, and why couldn't they see it? I mean, my understanding from news reports is the U.S. did have intelligence, but it was kind of a general nature, and so it wasn't interpreted as something as
They didn't
extensive
connect the
as what
dots,
happened,
just
right?
like 9/11.
So, and in fact, that is what Israelis feel this is. It is their 9/11, the largest single loss of life in an attack in their country's 75-year existence. So it's just major. I think as this was unfolding a week ago, people weren't fully aware of the people outside of Israel, and maybe even in Israel, were not fully aware of the extent of what was happening. And so now, the counteroffensive has begun with lots of rockets all week long, and hundreds of people killed on the Palestinian side in Gaza, and getting ready for this incursion with a request of evacuating over 1 million people. And so we heard from reports inside Gaza about the destruction, the death, the trying to explain the frustration of Palestinians over 75 years, trying to say why they feel they need to resort to violence, even as many Palestinians don't support the terrorism and militancy and the actions that Hamas took. But they often explain, well, here is why, because we've been frustrated all this time, even as they separate themselves from the terrorist actions of Hamas. And rightfully so. Terrorism under any cause is not okay. So that is what we're hearing from our correspondents, and kind of from a strategic analysis point of view. The United States has had a kind of a rocky relationship with Israel up to this point, up to a week ago, very concerned about the turn toward authoritarianism under Bibi Netanyahu. And the Israelis themselves had been protesting, but this has been a galvanizing force toward unity, like an about face toward very strong U.S. support for Israel, as well as Israelis uniting. And I think looking forward now, the question is, what is to come? How much destruction is to come? Will the Israelis overplay their hand in the name of self-defense? And that is what people will be looking at now. What is the response going forward?
It is on top of what is already a huge humanitarian crisis that has gone on for 2 years in Ukraine. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. And these are two powder kegs. We've got China on lurking in the wings with Taiwan, and we have this isolationist foreign policy mindset of a handful of Republican congressmen who don't want to do anything for Ukraine, but are ready to jump to the rescue of Israel without seeing the irony in that, because they're two sides of the same coin.
Well, I was just talking the other day with my husband about the changes in the world over the last 30 years. One of my previous jobs for the Monitor was I was their correspondent in Germany when the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain fell. And what a joy.
I lived in Germany when the Berlin Wall was built.
Yes. Well, Tandy, I didn't know that. Interesting. We'll have to have another side conversation about that.
Exactly.
What a joyous time that was, as dictatorship gave way to democracy, and people power was able to be realized and dreams fulfilled and freedom expressed. And what a different state of affairs we are in right now, with what seems to be the rise of autocracies and military action following that, being enforced through military strong arming. And, my only people do get depressed about this, right? And one of my thoughts about that is history does move in cycles. We do move from periods from the medieval times to the Enlightenment, and history moves in cycles, and I just don't believe that this is the last of the cycles.
The world is getting out of control.
Well, and it feels that way, Tandy, because we're also so much more exposed to it than we used to be. It's all over our social media.
Oh, that's true.
It's driving everything. So it just seems to be taking over our thought and our experience. So it definitely feels that way compared to, previous eras. But humankind has lived and survived through many difficult and cataclysmic times as well. Out of World War II came the Marshall Plan. So yeah, it definitely feels that way. And if we allow ourselves to be consumed by headlines constantly, then we forget about the essential nature of the human spirit, right? We forget that, well, most people I know are actually loving people. Oh, most people I know actually try to help their neighbor. Most people I know are involved in volunteer efforts. I mean, the human spirit is a remarkable, irrepressible thing that really can't be put down over the long run. And that is where I throw my faith.
Out of the Second World War and the Marshall Plan, we immediately went into the Korean War. And this movie that came out, Oppenheimer, we got the atomic bomb, and then the Soviets got it through a little help from the Rosenbergs. When I was growing up, I don't know how much older I am than you are, but when I was growing up, we had these duck and cover drills.
Right.
Where you went out in the hallway and you got up against the wall. And I always refer to those now as your kiss your ass goodbye drills, because there was no, no matter what you want to do at a school to duck and cover, if a bomb hits, that's it. We grew up that way. Kids now are growing up where they have to have active shooter drills.
Yes.
It seems like, and this was unheard of back in the day, but you didn't have copycats because of the 24/7 news cycle. So it's just gotten ridiculous. But I want to move on, because unless you have another thought you want to share.
I was going to just agree with you that the 24/7 news cycle and social media, I just feel really amplify and have a terrible effect on mental health as well.
Yes.
And I know any number of people who just don't watch as much news anymore, put down their social media and things like that.
Before you became the West Coast bureau chief, you covered Congress. The last 2 weeks, here again, we're in the second week of October, the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, was ousted after having been selected House Speaker back in January after 15 ballots. humiliating turn of events,
Mm.
unprecedented in its scope, he had to agree that one member could bring a motion to vacate the chair, which was also unprecedented. And now we're what? Is it 2 weeks or a week after he was
It's been
ousted?
at least 10 days.
And they've got this ridiculous Keystone Cops situation now where they can't come to terms on anybody.
Yeah.
And with the world going to hell in a handbasket, I almost called it the Soviet Union, Putin and Xi in China are watching what's happening.
Yeah.
Our NATO allies are watching what's happening. We look like a laughingstock. Could you have ever foreseen this happening?
This seems like it just started, 10 days ago or whenever it was that McCarthy was kicked out. It's been actually years in the making, and it's been a while since I covered Congress, but I was there when the right-wing Freedom Caucus, when one of the members did file a motion to vacate against John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House, and it never was acted upon. But that threat was there already several years ago, and it forced him into resigning. So this has been going on actually for years, and it has to do with internal divisions within the Republican Party. It has to do with personality conflicts. It has to do with increasing disrespect for the institution of Congress, the way it does its rules, the way it does its budgeting. And it's just been years and years and years in the making. And so maybe I didn't see this day coming when McCarthy, after mere months in office as the speaker, would be toppled, and then we would be in a complete moment of chaos. It truly is chaos on the Republican side as they try to work out who their new speaker is going to be. But I'm not surprised by it. Maybe I didn't see, oh, it's going to be Kevin McCarthy whose head is going to be on the chopping block. But if you've been following Congress and you've been following the internal divisions in the Republican Party, you are not surprised by this. And looking forward, because it's been years in the making, right? It's not going to be, an instant undoing, right? Whoever is going to be speaker will have all these same problems to deal with: a fractious GOP, basically the MAGA wing against the establishment wing, which is getting smaller and smaller. And let's say Jim Jordan is, who's the current nominee. He's a co-founder of the right-wing Freedom Caucus. Let's say he is elected speaker. His chair is not going to be, it's not going to be guaranteed. Anyone will be able to depose him, and he will find it's just as difficult to manage this caucus as all his predecessors have found.
And then there's no governing. There's nothing being put forward. There will be no way to get relief to Israel or to Ukraine. And I've spoken with my brother and sister a lot about this. We're very much political animals, and we wonder if the public writ large is paying any attention to this, and if this will in any way tilt the election more toward the Democratic Party, because the Republicans are proving themselves inept when it comes to governing. I don't know.
That's a good question. I haven't seen any opinion polling on this specific instance, but I can assure you that Republicans in swing districts will feel the brunt of messaging from Democrats who will be running against them and pointing out to constituents. You can thank your congressperson for putting the House in a position of impotence and absolute dysfunction at a time when we needed to pass a national budget, at a time when we needed to send aid to Israel, at a time when aid to Ukraine was at stake. And Democrats will be reminding constituents in those swing districts that of this chaos, even if people aren't, following all the ins and outs and machinations of it from afar right now. They will be reminded about it at election time.
When Pearl Harbor happened on December 7th, 1941, on December 8th, 1941, FDR went before Congress and asked for a declaration of war. Were something along the lines of Pearl Harbor to happen now, President Biden would constitutionally be required to go before Congress for a declaration of war, and Congress can't act at the moment.
Well, interesting. Look at Israel, right? You had huge division in Israel, including mass street protests. They are totally unified right now, and they have just formed a unified cabinet government just in this last week. So crises have a way of bringing unification to people and governments. And you think about when we suffered 9/11, there was a tremendous outpouring of unity in the country. And it was later the Iraq War that was a bridge too far for many people and brought a sense of disunity again to the United States. But crisis usually has a way of bringing unity to a people and a government.
I just remember that Ambassador Wilson, and I can't remember his first name, but he was and is married to the Valerie Plame, who was a covert CIA operative. He came back with the report that there was no yellow cake uranium and that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction, but George W. Bush wanted to go into Iraq anyway. And so the War Powers Act, as you said, was turned out to be a bridge too far because Osama bin Laden had nothing whatsoever to do with Saddam Hussein. And we got involved in this war that, and this is what I fear may happen with Hamas and the Palestinian people, is that you create terrorists where there weren't any. We will so engender hatred in the Palestinians who perhaps did not feel that way toward us, so that the possibility. Did you see the story where in Germany, and I can't remember the name of the town, 100 or so German citizens surrounded a synagogue to protect it on the day that the Hamas called for a day of worldwide rage. Did you see that?
They called for the Day of Rage just yesterday, I think it was.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
I did not see that story. That's very encouraging.
Yes, and this was it's such a turn of events because of the what happened in Germany and the Holocaust. But these German citizens gathered in mass around to be a human shield at the synagogue on the Sabbath.
Well, I think this is why you have the administration at the same time that they are absolutely in lockstep with the Israelis and defending their right to exist and denouncing terrorism. You have them saying, well, they must follow international law. And I mean, Israel has already not followed international law in two ways, according to experts. I'm not an expert, but according to experts, one is by calling for such a large evacuation of 1.1 million people from northern Gaza in advance of an incursion by the Israeli forces. And the other one is to blockade Gaza and deny power, food, and water. Those, according to experts, are against international law.
It's a war crime, in my opinion.
So I don't know how those are categorized, but in any case, you do see the U.S. kind of quietly saying, but you need to follow international law. And all of that really is for exactly some of the reasons that you're talking about. I mean, not only humanitarian, that is the basic reason, humanitarian concerns, but spinning into a wider war, overplaying its hand, causing a new, much wider conflagration in the Middle East, and even inviting terrorist attacks back to the United States or in Europe, as you were talking about, a re-inflaming of this divide, and it's a perilous moment for the world.
So, Francine, is there anything that we should have touched upon that we didn't?
Well, in our interview, you mentioned you were interested in the twists and turns of the Senate race in California to replace Dianne Feinstein, who passed recently. And
I am indeed.
We have we have one for sure new development, which is this past week, a former Dodgers baseball star, all-star, Steve Garvey, a Republican, said he was going to be running. And
I remember that.
Yep. And you have in the wings, not yet announcing anything, the appointed replacement to Dianne Feinstein, LaFonza Butler, African-American, former head of Emily's List, former labor leader in California, LGBTQ, a fresh face, which is a good thing, or a negative for her,
and also
not a household name.
Has most recently headed up Emily's List.
That's right. So she's been appointed, and she has till early December to decide whether she's going to jump in the race. And she would have some power as an incumbent as well. She would have the incumbent label next to her. And you were expressing a lot of enthusiasm for her and talking about her chances. And I was a little more skeptical because she is not a household name in California. These other campaigns, Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, Barbara Lee, all experienced members of Congress from California in the House, got their campaigns going a long time ago and have assembled war chests. And as you know, it's all about reaching voters in California in this huge, huge state. And so the media campaign is incredibly important. Well, LaFonza Butler doesn't have a war chest built yet, and the primaries March 5. We're just months away from that. So I think it's a steep, steep climb for her.
But having been the head of Emily's List, early money is like yeast, I think it stands for. I think that her donor outreach would be very quick to form.
Yeah.
And you said that a labor union in the state had endorsed Adam Schiff, but didn't she head up?
Several labor unions have already endorsed Adam Schiff, including the Teamsters, one of the biggest in California. And the health workers just swung behind Katie Porter. So they're not waiting for someone.
But do you think if she announced that she wanted to run, that would shake that up, or no?
It definitely would shake things up. It absolutely would shake things up. But a lot of politicians have already been committed. Nancy Pelosi is already behind Adam Schiff. Labor unions, quite a number of them, have already committed. But of course it would shake it up. Yes, it absolutely would. And one thing that she might have going for, I said, well, she's not a known name. She's not a household name, right? So she would have to build name recognition through an expensive media campaign with an effective media message that is very hard to develop in a matter of months or even weeks, because you have to get it out there. But one thing she could have going for her, not only all her ties, right, that we just talked about, Emily's List, the service union, labor union, and so on, but the fact that she is a fresh face, right? These other candidates have all been in the House, some for decades, and there is a fatigue. There is a fatigue with how Washington works, understandably. And so she could come as a fresh face, an alternative. And, that could turn out to be a strength as opposed to a weakness.
Indeed. It will be interesting to see how that shapes up.
And I should just mention one more thing. I mean, I did say that Steve Garvey has gotten in the race, right? People in younger generations probably won't remember this 74-year-old Republican who was an all-star for the LA Dodgers, but enough people will remember him, and he could be a unifying candidate among Republicans, right? And in California's top two finishers, it could turn out that both LaFonza Butler and Steve Garvey could upset things enough that it's not two Democrats who emerge at the top. It could be Steve Garvey and one of the Democrats. So when you get more people in there, especially a possible unifying figure among Republicans that brings them out to vote, even though they're quite diminished power in the state of California, the voting could split enough so that you wouldn't get your top two Democrats emerging, although it's highly unlikely and very hard to imagine if it were Steve Garvey versus whatever Democrat. It's hard to imagine a Democrat not winning eventually in the state.
You've got three very strong candidates in Lee, Schiff, and Porter, and now adding Butler to the mix. That would fracture the Democratic vote.
Yeah.
As you pointed out. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out. Francine, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me.
Oh, happy to do it.